You are sitting in a room full of people, perhaps at a dinner party or a workspace, and suddenly, without warning, a heavy, suffocating blanket descends over your mind. Minutes ago, you were vibrant, articulate, and present. Now you feel a visceral draining, a sudden exhaustion that settles deep in your marrow. It is not merely tiredness, it is a spiritual heaviness. You look at the person talking to you, someone who is smiling, perhaps even laughing, but you don't see the smile. You feel a cold, gnawing anxiety in the pit of your stomach that does not belong to you. You have absorbed their hidden debris. You leave the interaction feeling as though you have run a marathon through waist-deep mud, while they leave feeling lighter, energized, and strangely unburdened. You have been used as a psychic filtration system, and the filter is now clogged. For years you have been told this is a virtue. Society calls you sensitive, kind, or an empath. They tell you it is a gift to feel so deeply, but in the privacy of your own mind, it often feels less like a gift and more like a parasitic invasion. You find yourself retreating, isolating, cancelling plans at the last minute because the sheer caloric cost of existing around others has become too high. You wonder if you are broken, if you are chemically imbalanced, or if you simply lack the fortitude that seems to come so easily to everyone else. Whatever you think this is, let us discard the polite terminology. This is not just sensitivity. Carl Jung identified this phenomenon decades before we had the language of neuroscience to map it. He understood that what you are experiencing is a dangerous permeability of the psyche. You are suffering from what we will identify as the Unfiltered Resonance Trap. To understand why you are currently stuck in this cycle of absorption and exhaustion, we must look at the architecture of your mind through both the mystic lens of Jung and the cold, hard facts of modern biology. Jung argued that the human psyche is not a walled fortress. It is an archipelago, islands of individual consciousness connected beneath the surface by a vast, submerged landmass he called the collective unconscious. For most people, the water level is high. They remain safely isolated on their islands, blissfully unaware of what is happening on the neighbor's shore. But for you, the water level is dangerously low. The land bridges are exposed. You do not just guess what others are feeling. You walk across that bridge and inhabit their internal landscape. Modern neuroscience validates Jung's intuition with terrifying precision. We now know about the existence of mirror neurons, specialized cells in the premotor cortex and the inferior parietal cortex that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing it. In the average brain, there are inhibitory mechanisms, gating systems in the prefrontal cortex that say, "This is happening to them, not me." In your brain, those gates have rusted open. When you stand before a friend who is secretly grieving but outwardly smiling, your mirror neurons do not merely observe, they replicate. Your cortisol levels spike in resonance with theirs. Your heart rate variability aligns with their distress. You are engaging in a biological simulation of their trauma. Jung called this participation mystique, a primitive state of identity where the subject and object merge. While this was necessary for survival in our tribal past, knowing instantly if a predator was stalking a clanmate, in the modern world, it is a liability. You are walking through a crowded city of millions, your internal radar jammed by 1,000 distress signals. This creates a specific psychological injury. When you constantly process emotions that do not originate from your own experience, you suffer from ego-boundary dissolution. You lose track of where you end and the world begins. This is why you feel responsible for fixing people. This is why you feel guilty when you say no. It is not because you are nice. It is because, at a neurochemical level, their pain literally becomes your pain. To reject them feels like rejecting a part of your own body. However, Jung warned that this state of open borders is unsustainable. He observed that the psyche, like any biological organism, has an immune system. When a foreign agent, in this case someone else's chaotic emotion, invades the system for too long, the host mounts a defense. This defense often manifests in the empath's life as the shadow. You likely perceive yourself as a peaceful person. You value harmony, you despise conflict, yet if you are honest, there is a dark, simmering resentment growing beneath your ribs. Jung taught that the shadow is not just evil, it is everything we have repressed. For the empath, the shadow is not violence or criminality, it is selfishness. It is the part of you that wants to scream, slam the door, and watch the world burn just to get 5 minutes of silence, because you have suppressed your capacity for aggression and boundary setting, believing them to be uncaring. Your psyche has forced them into the unconscious. There they fester. This leads to what we shall call the martyr's inflation. You begin to secretly look down on the people you help. You start to view them as vampires and yourself as the victim. This is a dangerous trap. Jung warned that identifying too closely with the archetype of the healer or the savior leads to a psychological inflation that inevitably bursts. The danger here is critical. If you do not learn to integrate this shadow, if you do not learn how to close the gates of your mirror neurons consciously, nature will do it for you. We see this in the final stage of the unevolved empath: total emotional shutdown. The brain, flooded with too much external cortisol and norepinephrine, flips the circuit breaker. You go from caring too much to feeling absolutely nothing. You develop dissociative callousness. You stare at a crying friend and feel only boredom. This is not healing. This is a coma of the soul. But there is a third option. Jung believed that the tension of opposites, the war between your extreme empathy and your hidden resentment, is the engine of growth. The goal is not to stop feeling. The goal is to move from infection to perception. You must evolve from a passive vessel that catches every drop of rain into an observer watching the storm from behind a glass pane. To achieve this, we must look at a specific psychological mechanism Jung utilized in his clinical practice, something that bridges the gap between the mystical and the analytical. We must look at the concept of the psychic epidemic and how to inoculate yourself against it. Jung frequently treated patients who were not suffering from their own neuroses, but were acting as the symptomatic expression of their family's dysfunction. He noted that the most sensitive member of the group often acts as the canary in the coal mine, absorbing the toxic gas that everyone else is denying. You have likely played this role your entire life. In your family, you are the peacekeeper. In your relationships, you are the therapist. You have trained your amygdala to be hypervigilant, scanning for micro-expressions of anger or disappointment so you can neutralize them before they hurt you. This hypervigilance is an evolutionary adaptation, but it keeps your nervous system in a state of chronic sympathetic activation. You are always on. This prevents the process of individuation, the becoming of your true self, because you're too busy maintaining the emotional equilibrium of your environment. You are a moon reflecting the light of others, having forgotten that you are supposed to be a sun. To illustrate the catastrophic cost of this orbital error, let us examine a specific archetype often found in Jung's case files, a profile that likely mirrors your own history. Consider the case of a patient we shall call Julian. Julian was a high-functioning architect, a man celebrated for his ability to read clients. He could walk into a room and instantly sense what the client wanted before they spoke. His career was built on this hyper-intuition. But Julian came to Jung complaining of a mysterious, crushing fatigue and localized physical pains, chest tightness, migraines, and stomach cramps that had no organic medical cause. Western medicine declared him healthy, yet he felt like he was dying. Jung discovered that Julian was not suffering from his own pathology. He was living in a state of psychic osmosis with his wife, who was unconsciously grieving the loss of her father, but refusing to mourn. She maintained a stoic, cheerful facade, a stiff upper lip. Because she refused to process the grief, her psyche projected the suffering outwards, and Julian, with his open mirror neurons and eroded boundaries, caught it. He was physically manifesting the symptoms of her suppressed heartbreak. He was carrying her shadow so she could remain in the light. This is the hidden tragedy of the unevolved empath. You become the designated emotional trash can for your environment. In systems theory, this is known as homeostasis. A family or a workplace acts like a single organism. If one person refuses to carry their emotional weight, their anxiety, their anger, their shame, the system shifts that weight onto the member with the most permeable boundaries to maintain balance. That member is you. You are suffering from vicarious shadow possession. You're acting out the repressed emotions of those around you, leaving them feeling oddly calm while you spiral into madness. You must identify where you currently stand in this descent. Based on the synthesis of Jungian analysis and effective neuroscience, we can classify the progression of this condition into 3 distinct phases of empathic entropy. The first phase is the somatic echo. At this stage, your mind still believes it is in control, but your body has already surrendered. This is where the vagus nerve, the superhighway connecting your brain to your gut and heart, loses its tone due to chronic overstimulation. You walk into a meeting with a boss who is secretly insecure and aggressive, and before a word is spoken, your stomach drops. You develop autoimmune flares, mysterious skin conditions, or chronic inflammation. Neuroscience tells us that your insula, the part of the brain responsible for interoception, is firing so intensely that it cannot distinguish between your internal state and the external atmosphere. You treat these as physical ailments, popping pills and seeing specialists, not realizing that your body is simply screaming a psychological truth your mind refuses to acknowledge. You are in a toxic environment and you're absorbing the poison. If ignored, you descend into the second phase, the resentful saint. This is the most dangerous stage for your soul. Here, the sheer weight of carrying other people's emotional luggage begins to fracture your persona. You continue to say yes. You continue to listen to your friend's repetitive drama for the 100th time. But internally, the shadow has awakened. You begin to experience flashes of intense, irrational rage. You find yourself fantasizing about disappearing, about cutting everyone off. Jung would argue that this rage is actually a healthy signal. It is your psyche's attempt to assert a boundary. However, because you identify as the good person, you suppress this rage. This creates a state of neurotic incongruence. You are smiling on the outside, but your cortisol and adrenaline are spiking on the inside. This incongruence is exhausted by the brain's anterior cingulate cortex, which mediates conflict monitoring. You are literally burning glucose at double the rate of a normal person just to maintain the mask of politeness. You become bitter, passive-aggressive, and prone to sudden outbursts that confuse the very people you have been enabling. They ask, "What's wrong with you?" And you cannot explain that you are suffocating under the weight of their unlived lives. The final terminal phase is the dissociated ghost. When the pain of resonance becomes too great and the guilt of resentment becomes too heavy, the mind pulls the emergency brake. You enter a state of depersonalization. You no longer feel empathy, you feel apathy. You look at the world through a thick pane of glass. You might function, go to work, pay bills, hold conversations, but the lights are off. Jung described this as a loss of soul. In modern terms, this is severe burnout of the dopaminergic system. Your brain has learned that connection equals pain, so it has surgically removed your ability to connect. You have become a hollow shell, protected but dead. If you recognize yourself in the resentful saint or the dissociated ghost, you are standing at a precipice. The conventional advice, just set boundaries or protect your energy, is useless to you because it addresses the symptom, not the root cause. You cannot simply build a wall when your entire neurological architecture is designed to be a bridge. A wall will only make you lonely. You do not need a wall, you need a filter. Jung believed that the way out is not to retreat from the world, but to dive deeper into the self, to undergo the process of individuation. For the empath, this requires a radical restructuring of how you perceive reality. You must shift from being a censor to being a sovereign. The first step in this alchemical transformation is to develop what I call cognitive separation. You must learn to interrupt the automatic circuit of the mirror neurons. Currently, your process is perceive emotion, feel emotion, identify as my emotion. You must insert a wedge of consciousness into that sequence. Jung spoke of the observer self. This is the part of your psyche that watches your thoughts without being swept away by them. When the wave of anxiety hits you in a crowded room, instead of thinking, "I am anxious," you must train yourself to think, "I am perceiving anxiety in the field." This linguistic shift is not just semantics, it changes neural activation. By labeling the emotion as external data rather than internal state, you engage the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, which dampens the amygdala's alarm response. You stop the contagion before it reaches your bloodstream. You must treat emotions like weather. You are the sky. The emotions are merely clouds passing through. The sky does not apologize for the storm, nor does it try to fix the thunder. It simply provides the space for it to exist. This is the paradox Jung wanted you to understand. True empathy is not feeling what the other feels. It is understanding what the other feels while remaining distinctly yourself. It is the difference between drowning with a drowning man and throwing him a rope from the shore. But to stand on that shore requires you to do the one thing you are most afraid of. You must be willing to let others be in pain. You must develop compassionate detachment. This is the hardest lesson. You believe that your suffering alleviates theirs, that if you worry enough, if you care enough, you can save them. This is a magical thinking fallacy. Your suffering helps no one. In fact, by absorbing their pain, you are often robbing them of their own encounter with the shadow, the very encounter they need to grow. By carrying Julian's wife's grief, Julian prevented her from facing it, effectively keeping her stunted. Your empathy, when unregulated, is not an act of love. It is an act of enabling. To rise from this, you must engage in a practice Jung called the withdrawal of projections. But in your case, it is the refusal of injections. You must consciously visualize the emotional cords connecting you to others and sever them, not out of malice, but out of necessity. This brings us to the most potent tool in the Jungian arsenal for the empath, a concept that transforms your sensitivity from a weakness into a frighteningly powerful instrument of perception.